We live in an age of supreme technological arrogance. We look at our smartphones, our particle accelerators, and our orbital telescopes, and we confidently assume that humanity is standing at the absolute peak of a long, unbroken line of progress. We are taught that history is a straight arrow moving forward, that our ancestors were primitive, hammering away in the dirt with crude tools until the Industrial Revolution magically pulled us out of the dark. But the earth beneath our feet tells a very different and highly uncomfortable story. When archaeologists dig deep enough, they do not just find broken pottery and rusted swords. Occasionally, they uncover objects that shatter the timeline of human evolution. Artifacts that are so mathematically precise, so chemically complex, and so conceptually advanced that they simply should not exist in the eras they were created. These anomalies prove that human progress is not a straight line. It is a fragile cycle of brilliant illumination followed by devastating amnesia. Today, we are opening the vault of forbidden archaeology. We are going to examine 10 ancient technologies that were centuries and sometimes millennia ahead of their time. Technologies that prove our ancestors possessed knowledge that we are only just beginning to rediscover. Number 1. The Antikythera Mechanism. In the spring of 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers sought shelter from a violent storm near the tiny island of Antikythera. When the storm passed, they dove down into the clear Mediterranean waters and found the wreckage of a Roman cargo ship that had sunk 2,000 years ago. Among the statues and coins, they recovered a lump of corroded bronze. For decades, it sat in a museum, largely ignored. But when modern scientists finally subjected it to high-resolution X-ray tomography, they were paralyzed by what they saw. Encased in that ancient crust was a complex clockwork mechanism consisting of at least 37 precision-cut bronze gears. This was not a simple toy. It was an analog computer designed in ancient Greece, long before the birth of Christ. By turning a hand crank, the user could calculate the exact positions of the sun, the moon, and the planets. It tracked the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games. It could predict solar and lunar eclipses down to the specific hour and color of the shadow, factoring in the elliptical orbit of the moon using a sophisticated pin and slot mechanism. This level of mechanical engineering, utilizing complex differential gears, did not reappear in human history until the development of astronomical clocks in 14th century Europe. For over 1,000 years, the genius required to build the Antikythera mechanism was completely wiped from the face of the earth. Number 2. The Baghdad Battery. In 1936, a German archaeologist named Wilhelm König was excavating the ruins of Kujut Rabu, an ancient Parthian settlement near modern-day Baghdad. He unearthed a bizarre 5-inch tall clay jar dating back to around 200 BC. Inside the jar was a cylinder made of rolled copper sheet, and suspended right in the center of that cylinder was a single iron rod. The top was sealed with a plug of asphalt. To anyone with a basic understanding of chemistry, the design is unmistakable. It is a galvanic cell, a battery. When researchers built replicas and filled the jar with an acidic liquid available at the time, like grape juice or vinegar, the device produced between 1 and 2 volts of electricity. But why did people living over 2,000 years ago need electricity? Some scientists suggest they were used by ancient jewelers for the electroplating of gold and silver. Others propose a more mystical use, suggesting priests hid them inside religious statues to deliver a mild, divine shock to anyone who touched them. Whatever its purpose, the Baghdad Battery suggests that Alessandro Volta did not invent the electric battery in the year 1800. He merely reinvented something that the ancient Parthians knew about before the Roman Empire fell. Number 3. Roman marine concrete. Today, our modern infrastructure is crumbling. Portland cement, the foundation of our bridges and buildings, begins to degrade within 50 to 100 years, especially when exposed to salt water. Yet, across the Mediterranean, you can find ancient Roman breakwaters and piers that have been battered by ocean waves for 2,000 years. And they are not just surviving, they are actually getting stronger. How did the Romans achieve this? For centuries, their formula was a mystery. But recent microscopic analysis has revealed a chemical brilliance that modern material scientists envy. The Romans mixed quicklime with a specific volcanic ash known as pozzolana. When this mixture interacts with seawater, it does not erode. Instead, a highly rare chemical reaction occurs, growing interlocking minerals called aluminum tabermerite crystals. The ocean water actually triggers a self-healing process within the concrete, binding the material tighter and tighter together as the centuries pass. We are only now attempting to reverse engineer this ancient Roman recipe to save our own collapsing coastlines. Number 4. Damascus steel. During the Crusades in the Middle Ages, European knights arrived in the Middle East clad in heavy chainmail, wielding massive, heavy broadswords. They were stunned to encounter Islamic warriors wielding blades made of a mysterious, dark steel covered in swirling, water-like patterns. This was Damascus steel. These blades were so incredibly sharp they could slice a silk scarf dropped in mid-air, yet so flexible they could bend to 90 degrees without snapping. The Europeans were terrified of them, and for centuries, Western blacksmiths tried and failed to replicate the metallurgical process. By the 18th century, the original recipe was lost entirely, even in the Middle East. It wasn't until the year 2006 that modern scientists put a sample of an ancient Damascus sword under an electron microscope. They discovered something impossible. The steel contained carbon nanotubes and nanowires, structures that modern science only discovered in the late 20th century. By using a specific combination of trace elements from a unique iron mine in India and a complex forging process of repeated heating and folding, ancient blacksmiths were unknowingly practicing nanotechnology. They manipulated the atomic structure of iron and carbon to create the sharpest, most durable weapons of the ancient world. Number 5. The Lycurgus cup. Staying on the subject of nanotechnology, we travel back to 4th century Rome. In the British Museum, there is a stunning artifact known as the Lycurgus cup. It is a highly ornate glass chalice depicting the death of King Lycurgus. When lit from the front, the glass appears to be a murky, opaque green. But if you place a light source inside the cup, the glass instantly transforms into a brilliant, translucent ruby red. For decades, curators were completely baffled by this optical illusion. It wasn't until the 1990s that researchers realized the Romans were manipulating light at the molecular level. The glassmakers had infused the glass with particles of gold and silver ground down to 50 nanometers in diameter. That is less than 1,000th the size of a grain of salt. When light hits these specific suspended nanoparticles, the electrons vibrate in a way that alters the color passing through. Today, modern scientists use this exact same principle of plasmonics to diagnose diseases and develop advanced optical sensors. The Romans were doing it 1600 years ago to impress guests at dinner parties. Number 6. The Hufeng Didong Yi, the world's first seismoscope. In the year 132 AD, the Chinese polymath and astronomer Zhang Heng presented the Han Emperor with a massive, highly decorated bronze vessel. Arranged around the outside of the vessel were 8 bronze dragons, each holding a small bronze ball in its mouth, pointing in the 8 compass directions. Directly below each dragon sat a bronze toad with an open mouth. This was not an art piece. It was an early warning system. When an earthquake occurred far away, even hundreds of miles out of human perception, the internal pendulum of the device would swing perfectly in the direction of the tremor, triggering a lever that caused a specific dragon to drop its ball into the toad's mouth below. The loud clang would alert the imperial court, and the emperor would immediately know which region of the empire needed disaster relief, days before messengers could arrive. Modern scientists have attempted to rebuild the internal mechanisms based on ancient texts, and they confirm the device was incredibly sensitive to the seismic P waves that precede the destructive secondary waves. Zhang Heng had successfully captured the invisible pulse of the Earth. Number 7. The Iron Pillar of Delhi. In the Qutb complex of New Delhi stands a massive iron pillar, stretching 23 feet into the sky and weighing over 6 tons. It was erected by King Chandragupta II in the 4th century AD. If you take a normal piece of iron, leave it completely exposed to the harsh Indian monsoon rains, the blistering sun, and the humidity for 1,600 years, it will oxidize, rust, and eventually crumble to dust. Yet, the Iron Pillar of Delhi stands virtually rust-free. For years, alternative historians claim the pillar was made of extraterrestrial metal. The truth, uncovered by modern archaeometallurgists, is actually a testament to ancient Indian genius. The ancient ironsmiths extracted the iron without using limestone, which left a high concentration of phosphorus in the metal. Over time, as the surface reacted with the environment, this phosphorus catalyzed the formation of a dense, protective, crystalline film known as misohyte. This microscopic barrier completely seals the iron off from oxygen and moisture, effectively making it immortal. We are now studying this ancient technique to try and create rust-proof nuclear waste storage containers. Number 8. Greek fire. In the 7th century, the Byzantine Empire was on the brink of total collapse, facing massive naval armadas from the expanding Arab caliphates. The empire was saved by the deployment of a terrifying apocalyptic weapon known as Greek fire. It was a highly pressurized liquid incendiary pumped through bronze siphons mounted on the front of Byzantine ships. When sprayed, it ignited in midair, engulfing enemy ships in a roaring inferno. But what made Greek fire truly demonic was that it could not be extinguished with water. In fact, pouring water on it only made the flames burn hotter and spread faster. It burned on the surface of the sea, trapping enemy sailors in a liquid hell. The psychological terror it caused was absolute. The formula for Greek fire was considered the ultimate state secret. It was so heavily guarded that when the Byzantine Empire finally fell centuries later, the recipe was lost forever. Modern chemists have theorized it was a pressurized mixture of naphtha, quicklime, sulfur, and saltpeter. But to this day, no modern military has perfectly replicated the exact chemical properties of the Byzantines' ancient napalm. Number 9. The Nimrud lens. In 1850, the English archaeologist Austin Henry Layard was excavating the ancient Assyrian palace of Nimrud in modern-day Iraq. In the ruins, he discovered a piece of rock crystal that had been carefully ground and polished into an oval shape. It dates back to 3,000 years ago. When you look through it, the crystal has a focal point of about 4.5 inches. It is a functional magnifying glass. Official history states that lenses and optics were not invented until the Middle Ages in Europe. But here is a lens from ancient Mesopotamia. Some scholars believe it was used by Assyrian craftsmen to carve the incredibly intricate, microscopic details found on ancient clay cylinder seals. However, a much more controversial theory suggests it was part of an ancient telescope. The ancient Assyrians and Babylonians were master astronomers, possessing detailed knowledge of planetary orbits, the moons of Jupiter, and the rings of Saturn, things that should be invisible to the naked eye. Did Galileo merely rediscover the telescope millennia after the Assyrians used crystal lenses to map the heavens? And finally, number 10, Archimedes' death ray. We all know Archimedes as the brilliant Greek mathematician who shouted, "Eureka!" in his bathtub. But during the siege of Syracuse in 212 BC, he was a military defense contractor defending his city against the Roman navy. According to ancient historians like Lucian and Galen, Archimedes designed a weapon of mass destruction to repel the Roman ships. He created a massive array of highly polished bronze and copper shields, forming a giant parabolic reflector. By angling this array, he captured the blazing Mediterranean sun and focused it into a single blinding beam of intense thermal energy. When this solar beam hit the wooden hulls of the Roman ships anchored in the bay, the wood smoked, charred, and suddenly burst into flames. The Roman sailors fled in terror, believing the gods themselves were raining fire upon them. For centuries, modern physicists dismissed this story as an impossible myth. But in 2005, a team of students at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, decided to test the theory. Using 127 square mirror tiles, they focused sunlight onto a wooden replica of a Roman ship. Within 10 minutes, the wood ignited into a massive blaze. Archimedes had successfully harnessed the power of the sun to create a directed energy weapon, 2,000 years before the invention of the modern military laser. These 10 technologies are not just curiosities. They are warnings. They remind us that the library of human knowledge is fragile. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria, the fall of the Roman Empire, the burning of the Maya codices. Every time a civilization collapses, we reset the clock. We are forced to crawl back out of the dark, reinventing the wheel, the battery, and the computer, completely unaware that the ghosts of our ancestors are watching us, waiting for us to catch up to where they left off. History is not a straight line. It is a fragile, broken circle. What other technological miracles are buried under the desert sands, waiting to be found? And more importantly, if the brilliant civilizations that created these wonders could still fall into ruin and be forgotten, what makes us think that we are safe?